Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. For this next half hour, we ask and answer your questions about police reform and the next steps forward in the COVID-19 pandemic and perhaps a couple other things. I am joined live now by Tammy Duckworth, a U.S. Senator since 2017 and a former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel. Senator Durbin, we do hear you, and Dick Durbin, Senator since 1996 and the #2 ranking Democrat in the Senate. Both are Democrats, both he and Senator Duckworth. President Trump once again name-checked Chicago while rejecting calls to defund police.
47% of all murders in Chicago and 68% of all murders in Baltimore went without arrests last year. Americans want law and order. They demand law and order. They may not say it. They may not be talking about it, but that's what they want.
So let's start with Senator Duckworth. Ladies first. Senator, should we defend the police, as the president urges, or defund the police?
I think what the calls really are for, Mike, is to fund all of those other social services programs to the level that we fund our police. That we fund our police forces, right? We don't fund things like community outreach services. We don't fund after-school programs. We don't fund our public schools to the same level that we fund our police forces, and that's a problem because that creates that weakens our society so much so that we actually have an increased interaction that's negative between law enforcement and our various communities.
Senator, would you take money away from the Chicago Police Department, for example, and give it to those other items you mentioned?
I don't think it's a zero-sum game, Mike. I think that there are ways that we should be putting funding into all of these other programs, such as opioid addiction treatment, homelessness, hunger, after-school programs. All of those programs need to be funded. We have focused our funding on law enforcement, and then we've not put enough funding into these other programs. And I think that what we need to do is put more funding in some of these other programs. Remember that you can go down, if you ride the L, just 10 stops on the red line from the loop, and you go south, you're going to see a drop in life expectancy by about 18 years of a minimum drop in life expectancy, and that's from lack of access to health care. That's from lack of access to a good clean environment, all sorts of things that doesn't even involve police-involved shootings and crime or any of that. So
let me turn to your colleague.
We need to fund these other programs.
Let me turn to your colleague, Senator Duckworth. Senator Durbin, defend the police or defund the police? All right. Well, here, we're still working on getting Senator Durbin's audio in. So let me ask you, Senator Duckworth, we had a viewer, Sherry McClendon, who asked, what can you do to make the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the police union, and Chicago's mayor work together to make the CPD less political? They can't do their job with an us against them attitude.
Well, I proposed some legislation, and I've been doing it since the Laquan McDonald shootings. In fact, I wrote my criminal justice reform, my police training and independent review act with the mayor before she became mayor back in 2015. And then I took some existing legislation and then I wrote mine based on that. And what my legislation does is provide funding for police to do education programs on systematic bias in policing. They can get this money from the federal government. They can use it for police training, but in order to receive this money, they have to also include training on systematic racism in our criminal justice system.
So what do you think has gone wrong?
Let me finish. They have to also agree to having independent review of police-involved shootings. I think that's really important as well. So there are lots of proposals out there. I'm really proud that Kamala Harris and Cory Booker have included my proposal into their larger bill.
What do you think has gone wrong in so many police departments around the country?
I think that there has just been, I think one of the biggest things is this self-investigation, right? When you have police-involved shootings, for example, look at the Laquan McDonald example, and you actually have the same prosecutor's office that depends on that local police force to help them prosecute other cases, there's an inherent bias in the system. I think that if you have independent review, you're going to have more accountability. The police will be held more accountable. And I think that will make the police forces even more professional. And I don't know any police force that would be opposed to independent review, especially of police-involved shootings and deaths.
Well, I will say that I spoke the other day to the president of the Fraternal Order of Police here, who feels that he and his members have been treated very unfairly by the existing disciplinary process. He, of course, is currently stripped of his police powers, and he feels that the officers need more protections. Senator Durbin, what do you think of that? Should police officers get additional protections, or should the ones they have, as Mayor Lightfoot and others and the Democrats on Capitol Hill are calling for, reducing some of those defenses that police currently use? For example, they would make it easier, critics would make it easier for police officers to be sued, Senator Durbin.
Well, listen, here's the bottom line when it comes to liability. If a policeman has killed someone and done it unfairly, unjustly, they can be held criminally liable. But they can't be held civilly liable in most courts because of what's known as qualified immunity. That doesn't seem fair to me. If a family has lost a breadwinner, has lost a father of children, not receiving any civil compensation for that loss isn't fair. We believe that there ought to be at least a hearing in court. And
well, currently it's the city of Chicago's taxpayers, as you know, who pay in those cases, but the police officers can't be sued. You would favor having Congress change that? That's part of the bill that we've offered, the Booker-Harris bill. It's qualified immunity. And keep in mind, in most cases, we are dealing with insurance companies that the city of Chicago, for example, has a policy with to cover their employees and their wrongdoing. That's not always the case, but it's certainly been the case in many jurisdictions. But this notion that they should be accepting civil responsibility for their wrongdoing, I don't think that's unfair. I think the alternative is unfair. Well, those who oppose it say, Senator Duckworth, that will lead to police being less aggressive, and there will be innocent people who suffer as a result when the police are fearful of going after criminals.
Well, the problem is that there's systematic bias and racism in the system, and I would think that Laquan McDonald or George Floyd's family would probably be much happier if the police were less aggressive. And in fact, what we need is we need better relations with our local communities. We need better training with the police forces when it comes to the systematic racism that's in the system. And I do think that police should be held accountable civilly, as Dick has said, for the same transgressions that they are criminally liable for. I think that's just common sense, and I think that most people would support that. Okay, we do have a question, Senator Durbin. Let me pose this to you. I posed it earlier to Senator Duckworth. Our viewer Sherry McClendon had a question asking, what can you do to make the FOP and the mayor of Chicago work together and be less of us against them, and make the CPD less political? Well, what we're trying to do with this bill is to provide resources for recruiting and training. I really think that is essential, so that those who are seeking to be members of the police force or those who are on the police force and subject to review have an opportunity to be retrained and brought out on the job in a circumstance where they're not a threat to innocent people or they don't show bias in the police work. I think that's a step in the right direction, professionalizing the police beyond where they are today. But let me add, Mike, for the record, I know an awful lot of policemen and an awful lot of people in law enforcement I have over the years. I believe the vast majority of them are good people, they're humane, they're civic-minded, they're doing the right thing. But in their ranks are people who are not. And we have got to stand up for the good police and say that the bad police have to go. And it'd be great if the good police join us in that effort. I think it would restore confidence in the public. So let me ask, we have thousands and thousands of murders in just the past few years that have gone unpunished here in Chicago. And there are, the president famously says that he's talked to police officers here who say they could straighten this out in a few weeks. It does strike me that one way to stop the killing is to arrest more of the killers. Why are we doing such a poor job? Yeah. Well, Mike, I think that, again, this comes to the partially the funding issue, right? If you are on the south side or the west side of Chicago and you call 911 for help because you have a medical emergency, you are more likely to be driven to the hospital, not by an ambulance, not by a firefighter, but by a police officer. They are doing additional work beyond their regular policing work. And if we could free them to do their policing work, investing in more healthcare, more systems that are there to support our communities, then the police can spend more time to solve some of those murders. But right now, half the time, they're going out to deal with opioid addiction, and they're dealing with mental health crises and all that, because they're the first ones who end up getting to the scene, as opposed to what we really need on the scene, which are the healthcare and the mental health professionals, and we need to fund those programs.
Senator Durbin, let me ask about something that happened on the floor of the Senate today. You were urging Republicans to reach a bipartisan agreement on police reform, and then you said something that offended the senator from South Carolina, Tim Scott. You ended up apologizing. What was that about?
Well, I said to Tim, in fact, I started my statement by telling people what a great friend he was and how I respected him and how I thought he was the right person to head up this effort on the Republican side. He could have made a campaign brochure out of my speech, and I'm not exaggerating.
He was offended, though, that you said that this effort by the Republicans is half-hearted and token.
That's not what I said. I said we need to seize this historic moment. We shouldn't do something that's token, half-hearted. We have a chance to make significant change. Let's do it. He took the word token as an offensive word. I went up to him on the floor and I said, Tim, I respect you and like you so much. If it offended you, I apologize.
Well, let me switch to the COVID-19 pandemic that, of course, is wreaking so much havoc with the economy and so many other things, in addition to killing more than 100,000 Americans. We have a question from a viewer, Terry Gerber. She is asking senators, why is it safe to protest in large numbers, but businesses can't reopen? And is it safe to vote in person in November? Senator Duckworth?
Well, I don't think it's safe to protest if you're out there without your mask and all your protective equipment and all of the things that you need to be doing. You need to still maintain social distancing. You need to be wearing your mask. You need to be wearing your gloves. I think that is consistent. I think we should be adhering to the CDC's guidelines, regardless of what you're doing, whether you are out there peacefully protesting, whether you are out there trying to pick up, as I am, chicken McNuggets for my daughter, or whether you are out there showing up for work every single day because you are an essential worker and you're spending your time cleaning hospital rooms. You have to have all of your equipment and protect yourselves and practice all of those things. Frequent hand washing, don't touch your face. That is what's going to keep you safe, regardless of what activity you're engaged in.
Senator, you're talking to us, Senator Duckworth, talking to us from her home in Northern Virginia. Senator Durbin is talking to us from his office on Capitol Hill, as I understand it. Senator, is that right?
It's my apartment.
Your apartment on Capitol Hill. Okay. You have had COVID-19 in your family, Senator Durbin.
Yes. Unfortunately, my two grandchildren who live in Brooklyn, New York, and we believe their parents all, I believe, contracted COVID-19. It had reached a point where the doctor had said to them, it's too dangerous to go into the hospital to be tested. We're going to assume you have it. You have every symptom. And luckily, they're both doing all the families doing very, very well. But there were some tense moments.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Let's ask a next viewer question. Sharon Kretzer-Hennihan says the federal government issued a 3-phase approach to reopening. Each of those phases was 14 days based on science. Governor Pritzker took it upon himself to make 5 phases, extending them up to 28 days. Is this exerting unnecessary control? What do you think, Senator Durbin?
Don't overlook the fact that when we started into this battle against this virus, Illinois was not doing well in the earliest stages in terms of the rate of infection and the rate of death until this governor really pushed hard, required more testing and got more results and really went at it aggressively. Then we started to see some progress here. We were in pretty sorry shape. And I'm not going to fault this governor or second guess him into the right approach. We are talking about avoiding infections and saving lives. And there was a period of time where Illinois was struggling. We were, unfortunately, at numbers that far exceeded where they should have been just based on population.
So, Senator Duckworth, next month, the current coronavirus relief bills, unemployment benefits in particular, expire. Should there be another bailout bill or relief bill, depending on your point of view?
Well, there definitely needs to be another relief bill. And, you know, it's not just my point of view. Go ahead and ask all of the folks who right now are looking at the unemployment insurance ending. Look at the folks who have not been able to get back to work. Look at all the business owners, the small business owners who are struggling. COVID is going to be with us for quite a while, and we need to have another bill. I think the House passed bill has many good things in it. I wish that Leader McConnell would allow it to come to the floor for a vote in the Senate, or at least do some real meaningful negotiations so that we can actually bring this bill up to a vote, especially before the Senate recesses in 2 weeks. We desperately need this. I know that small business owners across Illinois, and remember, small businesses are 95% of the employers in our state, desperately need this bill to pass. I know lots of not-for-profits that are out there on the front line providing care and aid to people, whether it is a food pantry, whether it is health care, whether it's community health centers, whether it is child care. Those folks need this bill to pass as well. And it's really, really shameful that the Republican majority in the Senate has not allowed us to vote on this bill.
Senator Durbin, what should be in the next bill in 25 words or less?
First, we need to help the people who are unemployed, whose benefits expire on July 31st. More help for small businesses who still haven't received loans. And don't forget our hospitals. Tammy Duckworth and I were on a conference call today with hospital administrators across Illinois. They're in trouble, serious trouble. And we ought to be sending assistance from Washington. We can't afford to lose these hospitals.
So let me ask, the president has talked about an infrastructure bill. Again, Senator McConnell and the Senate majority seems reluctant about that. Does that make sense to you guys?
Eventually. I mean, I sit on the Transportation Committee, and I'm actually the chair of the Surface and Transportation and Safety Subcommittee, and I also sit on Environment and Public Works. So if it's anything to do with infrastructure, from sewers to airports to roadways to railways, I sit on that committee. I think we desperately need an infrastructure package in this country. I think this president has been, all talk, but no actual package has ever been forthcoming. This was a campaign promise of his, and he's not moved on it. He talks about it all the time, but he never actually delivers. I've asked Secretary Chao time and time again, at least twice a year, every year, for the last 3 years, and they get the same answer. It's coming, it's coming. You know, the American Society of Civil Engineers rate our infrastructure in this country at a D- grade. For us to get up to a C grade, we still wouldn't be competing with the likes of Korea or with Germany and other nations. And so we do need this. But, you know, the White House talks about this, but they never actually deliver.
We have hundreds of bridges here in Illinois that are problems.
Yeah, my priority right now is to get a COVID-19 relief bill passed.
All right, Senator Durbin, in terms, your colleague mentioned small business a few moments ago. The Treasury Secretary and the President are resisting releasing the names of those who've gotten these so-called small business loans. Some of them apparently have gone to businesses that are anything but small. Should that be made public or not?
Absolutely. This is public taxpayers' money, and we have a right to know who received these loans and to make sure that everything was on the up and up. I mean, of course they should. Why shouldn't? It's like saying the president never has to release his income tax returns. I just don't buy it. You know, in these circumstances, the public has a right to know, and the administration should not be hiding it.
So State Senate President Don Harmon famously sent a letter a couple of months ago to Washington asking, and I think you guys got a copy of it, asking for money, $10 billion for Illinois public employee pensions. Is that going anywhere?
Mike, let me tell you, J.B. Pritzker had a bipartisan congressional delegation phone call. Tammy was on it with me. And the first question I said to the governor is, in front of the Republican members of Congress here, are you asking for money from Washington to solve Illinois' pension crisis? He said no. We are talking about lost revenue because of the state of the economy and the pandemic that we face. It is not for a pension bailout. He made it clear. And I think that ought to be clear to every critic. And incidentally, one of the biggest critics of the state of Illinois' pension problems was Mitch McConnell. Guess which state is languishing with pension problems just south of us? Happens to be the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And the incumbent governor lost in that last race because of the pension issues. There are pension issues across the nation. It isn't just Chicago and Illinois.
Senator Duckworth, what's your take on terms of how much local governments like City Hall, Cook County, the suburban counties ought to get in the next relief bill, the next coronavirus relief bill?
Well, I think it needs to be proportional. In the last coronavirus relief bill, the CARES Act that we passed, we set aside money, I believe, and correct me how much actually has gone out, because in regular negotiations right now. But we set aside so that each of the states would get $1 billion, and then the rest would be divided among the municipalities based on their size within each state. And so I think that's what needs to be in this next CARES Act, funding to help make up the lost revenue for tax revenue, sales tax revenue, for example. I'll give you an example. I was speaking with President Preckwinkle, and she was saying how desperate the situation was for Cook County Health Services because of the loss in revenue for Cook County, and they need help so that we can actually get money to the hospitals on the front lines, helping our communities, especially those who are uninsured, the communities the most in need. And by the way, these are the communities that are also the hardest hit. We know that African Americans are 14% of our population in Illinois, but they're over 40% of the COVID-19 positive cases in the state. Our Black and brown communities are especially hard hit with COVID-19, and so Cook County can't help them to the extent that they need to be able to, because they've lost the revenue. So I think it needs to be proportional, and I think it needs to be based on need. But I think that we need to pass this bill so we can get that.
All right. Let me go to another viewer question, Senators. One that touches on this alleged double standard. Laura Winchick-Dominow asks, why are state and local governments allowing large protests but not allowing school graduation ceremonies? Senator Durbin?
Well, let me say that there's a decision being made as to how large of a group can come together. The decision was made not to bring in the families of those who just graduated from West Point for their graduation ceremony, even with the President of the United States. So each of these decisions is a calculation based on risk. And I would say for those who decide to exercise their constitutional rights, whether they're on the right or left side of the spectrum, they can do it if they wish, but they do it at additional risk if they are inside as opposed to outside. They do it at greater risk if they don't wear a mask. They do it at greater risk if they don't maintain social distancing. All of these things are risk factors, and many of the standards established by the states, they are taking the things that they think are the most worrisome, attending movies, for example, going to large attendance sporting events, and they're saying that's just too risky. We're going to draw the line there. But there is a gray area here, and a decision's being made based on the results. How are we doing once we start to reopen?
Can I ask you guys, what do the two of you think is a reasonable, when do we put this behind us? When do we get a vaccine or a drug that will save people from dying and effectively get us past this crisis? Senator Duckworth, what's your best surmise? It's
testing, 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 testing. That is, as we used to say in the Army, the pacing item. Until we have enough tests available so that anyone who needs a test can get one and can afford it, we don't really move beyond this. Yes, the virus, especially if we can't develop a vaccine anytime soon, we can't fully reopen until everyone who needs a test can get it. Because that is how this virus spreads. There's so many people who are spreading it who don't know that they have it, or those who do have it, who are deemed essential workers, who can't go to their bosses and say, hey, you know what, I tested positive, because they can't get the test or they can't afford it. And so testing is really the most critical piece of this puzzle as we move forward. And if we don't have that, we stand the risk later on in the fall of having to shut the economy down again. And that will be so much more detrimental to our economy than if we were to move forward slowly the way Governor Pritzker has us moving.
So when do you think, Senator Durbin, we get out of this?
Well, a major pharmaceutical company, Moderna, has a vaccine, and they're going into phase 3 clinical trials, and they're doing it at the University of Illinois at Chicago. That involves 30,000 people who will be tested. Some of them receive a placebo, some of them receive the vaccine. They estimate that they need 2 years of information gathering and blood tests to determine two things. Is this vaccine safe or effective? Now, those who talk about warp speed will have it by Christmas, may be wishful thinking. But companies are preparing, once we find that vaccine, to move into production quickly. I can't tell you, Mike, when it's going to be. I hope soon. For goodness sakes, we want to put this behind us. But we want to do it safely and effectively. And let me add as well, we need to be part of vaccine efforts all over the world. We're not the only country in the world looking for this vaccine. There are some hundreds overseas. We need to be part of those as well, so that what we find, we share with them. What they find, they share with us. When the president decides to walk away from the World Health Organization, he makes that more difficult.
So let me ask, have each of you, have either of you delivered commencement addresses, either virtually or in person this year?
I did a virtual one.
Let me ask, is to the people, not just to the kids and the college graduates and high school graduates, but the people who've lived through these twin crises, that we've seen in the wake of this need for police reform and then this pandemic. Senator Duckworth, what's your message to those folks?
My message to them is that we are a strong and resilient country. We can come together. We can get through this pandemic. If you look at, I'm so proud of what we did in Illinois when we all hunkered down and practiced social distancing and did what we need to flatten the curve. And then with the divisions within our society, we can come together. We can do this. We have to have a lot of understanding and a lot of patience, and we have to have some systemic changes. So we need systemic change within our healthcare system so that we can address this pandemic. We also need systemic change within our criminal justice system. But we can move forward on this, and we've shown that we can do this.
All right, Senator Durbin, we got about 30 seconds.
Well, those who didn't have graduation ceremonies have bragging rights for a long time about something that happened when they graduated high school. They'll be telling these stories for quite a while. These are resilient, forward-looking young people, and they have great futures ahead of them. This is just a bump in the road. There'll be plenty of time for family celebrations when it's safe for mom, dad, and grandparents and everybody to show up at the same time.
All right. I want to thank Senator Tammy Duckworth from her home in Northern Virginia, and Senator Dick Durbin from his apartment there on Capitol Hill for both joining us and taking the time this evening to talk about police reform and how we move forward in this pandemic. And thank you at home for joining us, too. I'm political editor Mike Flannery. We'll be back at 9 o'clock with the news.